So .NET Core 1.0 was released yesterday, and this is officially for real cross-platform now. So if you're curious about developing on Linux, let's smash on that.
This is episode number 44 of the Asp.Net Monsters, and today we're going to show off developing on the Linux. Or the Linux? Have we settled that debate yet?
It is Linux. Linus Torvalds, there's a wave of him going around that says, "My name is Linus Torvalds, and I pronounce Linux, Linux." That's what he says.
All right. I guess I've been
Like a
saying it
Google
right, which
wave?
is probably more than we'll be able to say about how I use it here. So I was curious about this. It's been a long time for me since I've used Linux desktop, like from maybe back in the university days when we had to do some OS things. Thought I'd give it a try. I wanted to try .NET Core on here, and I installed Ubuntu at the time. I guess 14.04 was the one that was supported at the time when I did this. But just went to .NET here and hit the download .NET Core button. Followed the instructions for Ubuntu/Debian styles of flavors of Linux. So we don't have to go through that, but the directions are all here. Shows you exactly what to do. I just did that, and it magically worked. I had .NET, and then I wanted a nice editor. So I thought I'd give Visual Studio Code a try. And again, just went to the site, gives me a download link. I installed it. It just installed, and it worked. It was quite a bit easier than I expected it to be, just compared to the days when I had done this a long time ago. But that gave me .NET. When I open the terminal, I have .NET. Just check the version. It is 1.0.0.preview2, so that's the latest version that went out yesterday. That includes the RTM version of the actual framework itself. So I did that. Everything worked. I had actually done this back with RC2, and I just logged into this today again to give it a try, and everything updated pretty smoothly. It was a pretty straightforward process to update to the RTM bits. I was pretty happy with that. But what I was doing was I wanted to try on a Linux desktop with an application that was connecting to SQL Server that was on a different machine in my local network, so that I could still do kind of a dev scenario where we have Windows developers that are writing against SQL Server, and then a Linux developer who's doing that too but can't run SQL Server on that machine yet, so they have to connect to a remote machine. And I was running into some issues with that. I was pretty sure I had the connection string right, and I just couldn't get the connection. I was even opening up Telnet to make sure that the port was open, and I could hit the port and it was there. So I knew that it was configured properly. There was something wrong with the connection string. So just to give you an idea of the type of day I was having, I have a folder called Huh. I was trying to figure out what was going on. And in here, I just did a .NET New and created a very simple project. And if I do code dot to launch Visual Studio Code here, it actually brings up the project for me. And all this was a simple, here's my connection string. Do a very simple command to make sure that I can actually run this. And I created this sample app just to isolate the problem so that I knew that I was only testing that connection piece and not all the other pieces of ASP.NET.
Your machine naming scheme is super boring.
Isn't it? I'm pretty bad with names like that. If I ever have kids, it's going to be sad. It'll be like child 1. When I went to run, I was running this from the command line. I was having trouble figuring out what was going on, and I thought, I'll open it in code and just try this whole debugging thing, see if it works. And it didn't initially, but a little thing dropped down here, and it's not that you won't see it now, but a little tooltip kind of thing that said, hey, do you want us to add the things you need in order to debug? I said, sure, do that. And that ends up adding a couple files here. So under .vs Code, there's launch.json, which tells it exactly what to do to launch the app, and then tasks.json, which is, again, just telling it how to build the app. So it adds those pieces, and then magically all the debugging works. So I can actually launch this, run the app, and step through the code here. So it hits my breakpoints, and I think it was on the open here where it would crash. And it was timing out, so it takes a little while here. It's trying to make that connection to my SQL Server instance.
So it's not a complete tool chain, like it's not as comprehensive as what we might be used to in Windows, but I guess not everybody's looking for that in an editor either, right?
No, that's right. But having the debugger in there, that's pretty powerful. Being able to step through the code, and it's a pretty rich debugger. Like there's a lot going on here.
I was trying to think the other day of like what would be missing that would stop me from using this as my primary development environment. And other than like some refactoring tools, I couldn't really think of anything.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Basically, even just some basic refactoring would be great, and then
just
really
rename, extract a method. That's pretty much
right. And I guess it probably depends a little bit, at least on tool set and where things are at from a maturity perspective. But the previous project that I was working on had a ton of resource file. We had like extensions, plugins for Visual Studio that helped us manage international, like translations for international distributions and things like that. And those things have not yet, as far as I know, depending on which extension you're using for Visual Studio, it may or not be in VS Code, right? So
those are just XML files, though, aren't they?
Not in this case, actually. It was an Excel-like plugin that allowed you to take your resource files, export them to Excel, and then let your translators work on it, and then suck them back in. And the tooling was implemented in Visual Studio.
Nifty.
Interesting. But there is an
But
extension
you've got
model, right?
stack
So
traces.
yeah, and this is how I was finally able to
Exactly.
figure out my problem. I was running it from the command line, and it just dumps out it does an exception toString basically, and dumps it out to the log, or to the console, and that I wasn't getting the information I needed, but through the because it paused on the exception here, which was a SQL exception, I was able to kind of dig into the details of that exception, eventually figure out what was going on, and that was that apparently the system.data.sql client on cross-platform, like on Linux and Mac OS X, doesn't support the named instance thing yet. So you can't do like / whatever the named instance was. That's just not there yet.
But this is version 1.0.
Yeah,
You just
so you
can't
wouldn't
connect
expect it to be there.
databases.
So you can connect, and it totally works, just not at all the way you would have expected it to, which is unfortunate. But now I'm able to actually step through and see the result of my fancy query there, in theory. Yep.
And in practice.
Hey, there we go.
And there's my result of 4.
Right. And I would imagine a second
success.
pass through would probably be quicker.
Most likely. So that I did lose a lot of time on that problem, but I was pretty impressed that I was able to solve it by using this tooling. Pretty excited about where it's going. I could, as Simon was saying, I could totally see this being my main developer environment, especially with the way they kind of link into task runners and all the shortcuts there and plugins for making a pretty smooth workflow. I think it'll be a great tool.
Right on. And so this is available on Ubuntu. It's available on Mac, and
I think they added a big list today for .NET anyway of what they supported it on. I don't think the list was this big for the release candidates for like officially supported flavors on Mac, on Docker. In Visual Studio Code, I'm actually not sure. I guess it's same thing basically.
Yeah, it's already supported
Or
anywhere that
CentOS.
Node is.
Yeah,
And I guess Chrome.
which is pretty much everywhere, I suppose. So pretty cool. It actually works. One of the things that when I first installed it, Visual Studio Code, I was a little disappointed. IntelliSense wasn't working. I thought that was supposed to be there by default. It turns out that you need the C# for Visual Studio Code extension. It's not just part of it. You have to install that extension. So if you're not seeing IntelliSense, that's probably why you need to install the C# extension first. And then that includes all the OmniSharp bits, and all the IntelliSense lights up after that.
I think that's in tune with what they were trying to do as far as making sure that VS Code itself shipped very light,
Yeah.
and then
And that it
you
wasn't just
added
a
in the
C#
pieces that you
editor,
need.
right?
Exactly. So if you wanted to go, there's Python on there, right there. There's Go, there's the PHP, there's the JavaScript bits.
Yeah.
If you, whatever your flavor is, whatever the tool set is that you want to support your language, then you only install those bits, right? Which is kind of a departure from the, Visual Studio model, which, if you just select the default install, you get all kinds of things like the like emulators and tooling for Azure and things like that, which you may or may not use.
Yeah, and 2 or 3 gigabytes later, you eventually have your product. So today I updated 2 Windows machines. Took me, well, it didn't take me that long, but it was still close to an hour before everything installed. Just going through the web installer and downloading all the bits it needs, and actually going through the Visual Studio installer. It did not take that long to get things updated on this Linux machine. It was pretty quick. It actually prompted me when I logged in, even through the, whatever this thing is, the system updater, or the software center. So Visual Studio Code was installed through there, and it noticed that there was an update. It actually failed, though, so I don't know if it was just an RC2 to RTM thing. But it knows when there's updates, and it's able to push them out, is the theory at least. So hopefully that works next time there's an update and it actually happens automatically. We'll see.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I'd also be interested to see where the plugin community for this goes.
Mm-hmm.
Like in theory, if you can write Roslyn analyzers, I don't really see why you couldn't kind of plug them in here with some shims.
Yeah, that's true. That should be supported pretty easily, actually. I would imagine they're thinking about it. There's probably some issues on the GitHub repo to that effect.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll dig into that in the future when Simon writes some Roslyn analyzers.
It's on my list. I keep meaning to do it.
All right. Well, that's my adventures in Linux anyway, so thanks,
Awesome.
everyone. I'll see you next time.
See you.
Cheers.